Okay, yeah, fine.
But why do people like you think he did?
Because he popularized it.
Because he popularized it and there's propaganda and you guys actually don't understand the theory itself.
No, like it's the central ideas.
Let me tell you something, right? The
The
selfish gene idea, the idea of a gene-centered view. This came about when Richard Dawkins was still in his nappies.
كتاب الله دستوري كتاب الله دستوري وخير الخلق أسوتنا بسنته.
Two concepts. Natural selection can be broken down into two things. Either it can be a tautology, which is survival of the fittest. We're not talking about that. Clearly, the fittest survive. That's why they survive.
Yeah.
What we're speaking about is, does natural selection lead to biological novelty and body forms and these types of things? So it's a completely different question. Now,
do any of them disagree with that? Do any of them say that natural
yeah, of course they
selec-
do. Of
No,
course
no,
they do.
no, no. I think that's a total
And sir-
misrepresentation.
and sir-
I think they'd all agree
sir-
that natural selection does account for speciation, but there
Sir-
are other kind of mechanisms
sir-
like epigenetics and like
So you do agree epigenetics is an alternative?
epigenetics that you have
not alternative.
evidence for.
It's not alternative.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's an alternative.
So it's not an alternative. No, either be clear.
Let's be clear by what we mean by epigenetics. Like epigenetics an example of epigenetics would be how kind of whether a gene is turned on or off can be a gene can be turned on during lifetime and that can be passed on to the next generation.
Is it heritable?
Yeah, and so we have evidence that's occurring, and so there's no reason
So,
why that's at odds with Darwinism. That's accepted, and
sir,
there's nothing.
so tell me
it's
this.
not like kind of there's a
Sir-
big schism or a big rift, or like, oh no, the whole pyramid's come crashing down.
Sir, tell me this. Why is it that academics have spoken about Lamarck being mocked for 200 years?
Because he didn't have any evidence for what he was.
No, that's not true.
presupposing. He hadn't identified a
Sir,
molecular mechanism.
Sir,
like
you have to be
methylation.
consistent here. Either Darwinian evolution as we have it today, in terms of a gene-centered view, either it's compatible with a Lamarckian epigenetic view, or it's not. You can't have it both ways.
Like the mainstream kind of, there's nothing in the mainstream view on evolution that says epigenetics doesn't occur, because we have evidence
I agree.
that epigenetics
And
occurs.
how
And so
when did we get that evidence?
It was pretty recent. So
Yes,
only
it
like
was pretty
25
recent.
years ago,
So,
I think.
since that evidence has been coming out, what does it show? It actually shows you have adaptation, which is not Darwinian.
Yeah. Okay, but we don't need to be. We
So,
don't
sir,
need
you agree it's adaptation, which is non-Darwinian?
Sure, but there's no.
It's not even, what do you mean? It's not adaptation. The everything doesn't work like that. It's not adaptation.
Well, I'd say it's adaptation. I didn't have a problem with that word.
No, but
Like,
it's adaptation, which is non-Darwinian.
Sure, but like what?
There you go, so it's an alternative.
So is genetic drift.
So is, yes.
Yeah, and
Which
so
is why when
there's nothing wrong with theories evolving. It's
and
finding-
genetic drift is another form of non-Darwinian evolution.
But we're not bound to say Darwin was 100%
Do you agree with that?
correct
Do you agree
to
genetic drift is also another example of non-Darwinian evolution?
It's a form of evolution that he kind of hadn't considered.
Okay, sure.
But there's no reason why we need to be bound to what Darwin.
Sir,
this is what you always do. You kind of conflate the modern synthesis and the biological mainstream with Darwinism, and you just leap forwards and backwards and say, "Oh, did Darwinism know about this? Oh, then Darwinism is wrong."
Sir,
but then just a few minutes ago, you were talking about the modern synthesis, which is like.
Sir, when I refer to Darwinism, I'm speaking about the gene-centered modern synthesis view. I'm not talking about Darwin. Darwin didn't know about the genes.
But genetic drift, like, there's nothing kind of contradictory to the gene-centered view about genetic drift.
Well, of course there is.
Okay, explain that.
Because you have non-Darwinian evolution.
No,
and in
no,
fact,
no, but it's
sir,
gene-centered, though.
sir, in 1975,
genetic
when
drift is just probability.
when genetic,
no one would
sir,
argue against it.
when genetic drift was published academically, the first thing it was called was non-Darwinian evolution. That's the name of the paper.
Okay, so yeah, it does disagree with like.
So let's
just
establish
purely,
there are alternatives to natural selection.
No, but they both occur. Natural selection occurs and genetic
Sir,
drift occurs.
sir,
and
you're
Sir, neo-Lamarckism.
you're conflating the tautology.
Anything that we have like evidence of occurring occurs.
Sir,
or like we adopt the model as it occurs.
Sir,
this is the scientific method.
Sir, what you're doing is this.
We
What you're
adopt
doing
our
is
models
this.
based on evidence. What do you have a problem with about that?
What you're doing is this. You're committing the fallacy of the undistributed middle. There are two definitions of natural selection. There is the definition in which it's a tautology, survival of the fittest survive. I agree, everyone agrees, that lamppost agrees. What we're speaking about is natural selection generating novelty, generating biological forms, body forms.
Yes, it does that.
Natural selection being the driving force from the first cell to you, me, and the kangaroo. That's what we're speaking about.
Do you think the proponents of the extended synthesis disagree that natural selection leads to any speciation? Do you think they disagree with that proposition?
I think the proponents of the third way of evolution disagree.
But what is this third way of evolution?
Okay.
Is that another name for the extended synthesis model?
No, it's more than the extended synthesis. The extended synthesis still tries to work within modern synthesis. It tries to extend it. The third way is saying this.
Is that mainstream? Is there kind of
Yes. So let me just explain, right? So the third way of evolution, the reason why it's called third way is this. They are a bunch of secular atheist evolutionary biologists who do not believe in God or intelligent design or creationism, and they don't believe in Darwinian evolution. So what they want to do is they want to come up with a third way. And we have scientists here from China, from America, from Europe, from all over the world, from Harvard, Oxford, MIT, all over the place. And what they're saying is this. They're saying natural selection doesn't work. We need another mechanism.
Okay, so they would disagree, for example, if you have like a population of moths, and moths in the city are exposed to, say, soot or sooty environment,
Sir,
and then they develop
that's the first
different...
definition of natural selection.
But that leads to the biodiversity.
No, that's no.
That is biodiversity. If you have like two different organisms,
let me give you
species adopting different phenotypes as a result of selection pressure. That's natural selection.
This is again a fallacy of equivocation. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. For you to say that darker moths are, say, they're more likely to survive because they were on the trees than the lighter moths, all you're pointing out is the survival of the fittest. Now, survival of the fittest
and the outcome
obviously exists,
but
that's not. No, sir, that's not the same thing as human chimpanzee ancestry or any of these other speculative hypotheses. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
No, but you asked like, but you said that like this group of biologists like would disagree that natural selection led to this like biodiversity occurring.
Sir,
are you really saying
that? Sir, firstly, this is a good opportunity to churn out some of the propaganda, right? Even that very experiment that was done by Catterwall. Do you know he faked those experiments?
Okay,
and he was exposed.
But
do you know that or not? Did you know that?
I don't know that, but I'll check on it later.
Okay.
But there are other examples
have you heard of Jerry
speciation.
Coyne? Have you heard of Jerry Coyne?
There are other examples of speciation.
Sure, but have you heard of Jerry Coyne?
No.
Very famous atheist evolutionist who's always with Richard Dawkins, right? Do you know what he called that experiment?
No.
He called that experiment like finding out Santa Claus is not real because Catterwell faked those results.
Okay. Sure.
Right? But assuming those results, sir,
do
you know what he did? Those moths were dead and he stuck them on the trees.
Okay.
So that very experiment was faked.
Okay, but
that number one, that's a good way of showing how this is more than just science. Yeah, we have to fake experiments. But even if it was true, at best,
plenty of other experiments that show the
same
thing.
Sure,
so you're showboating.
Sir, no, sir. Do you know what? We can move on to other ones, but the very fact you want to move on shows you might have known some of this before.
No, I didn't know that before.
And if you did know that,
the last time I heard about that was in A-level biology about that particular moth example.
Sure. And how many other sciences do you know of in which you have these types of fakes happening at a mass scale?
Like you get it in medicine quite often, I guess.
Right. So what's the reason when they do it in medicine?
There are various reasons.
What? Financial?
Ego, financial.
Financial, right.
Sometimes they believe that they're actually right, but they've uncovered like.
I mean when they do it on purpose. I mean when they do it on purpose.
Like a variety of reasons.
Right.
Like
the reason when they do it in Darwinism is because of ideological. For example, when we see that famous image of the chimpanzee-like creature becoming into a human being. Now you're a learned person. Tell me this, do any of the evolutionary biologists across the world actually know what that common ancestor looked like?
No. Well, we can have a we can have a an error bound or a confidence interval of what.
What if I was to tell you?
Because there's evidence to suggest like we wouldn't believe that it had two heads, for example. So obviously we can make some assumptions.
What if it looked like a human being?
What if it looked like a human being? Well, that would be less supported because we.
No, sir.
It would be less supported because we know that like genes drift over time.
Sir, let me just tell you this, right? Henry Gee, the senior editor of Nature, the most prestigious journal in the world. He's an atheist and evolutionary biologist. In his book, The Accidental Species, do you know what he says about the common ancestor between human beings and chimpanzees? It could have been any way. We don't actually know what it looks like. It may even been human-like.
No, but it wouldn't be exactly like us, though.
Look, sir.
No.
Okay,
Let's
sir.
Do we know that kind of genes, the gene distribution changes over
Sir,
time?
it could have looked like a
Yes, we
pig,
do.
for all we know.
That's unlikely, though.
Wait,
Oh,
sir.
you're spreading
Wait,
such
sir.
misinformation
No,
here.
wait,
You're leading
sir.
people to believe that kind of genes just do whatever they want, or that any genetic outcome is equally likely.
No,
That's not true.
sir. Do you believe that natural selection can turn a species A into B?
It could do.
Yeah, it could do. Can it turn B back into A?
That's much harder to do. But
Okay.
Why?
Why?
Hypothetically, it could.
Why?
It's much harder to do because,
Are birds the descendants of dinosaurs?
Yeah, in a way, you could
Okay,
say
fine,
that. Yeah.
fine. And we're also technically the descendants of the first cell,
Yeah.
right? So, from a Darwinian perspective, I'm going to make a claim. If you don't shoot down the claim, that's fine. Classification is almost arbitrary because any species can slide into another. You can have a human-like ancestor, wait a second, a human-like ancestor becoming into a chimpanzee-like ancestor becoming into a pig, or the other way around. Anything goes.
No, that's not
You
true.
disagree?
Yeah.
Let me give you a reference for that. Michael Roos, Philosophy of Human Evolution, the Cambridge book.
Okay. And
In it, here's what he says.
He's claiming it's as easy for like the first
What he
cell
be-
to evolve
what he
into,
says
like, a
is
dinosaur,
classification.
as a dinosaur to evolve back into the first cell. That's
Classification is almost arbitrary because from a Darwinian perspective, anything can become anything.
In theory, but some ways.
In theory, and it
but
is a theory.
But some ways are much harder than other ways, though.
Sir, but what you're actually speaking about now is environmental constraints. But here's the point.
No, I'm not just talking about environmental constraints.
Well, what else are you speaking about?
So, but basically, kind of, you can model it as an energy surface. Like, you can model, like,
Based on what parameters?
When you evolve a particular trait, like for example the eye, and you adopt a particular kind of strategy for seeing things. Like for example,
That's environmental.
Like for example, you know how there are squids which don't have something like what's it called, an iris. They have like basically a hole here. And so, given that once they've kind of evolved that structure, they've like reached a kind of local minimum where any kind of movement away from that would make them less fit and less able to reproduce. And so it's much less likely that they would then suddenly like evolve, into a human, because they'd have to go through kind of these life forms, these kind of intermediate life forms, which are totally rubbish at surviving and reproducing. So yes, clearly there are some movements which are
Hang on,
kind
sir.
of easier according to natural selection than other movements.
And these are environmental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
everything's
I point.
environmental.
Exactly. That's what I just pointed out.
Okay, so what's
So
the problem here?
There is no problem. The problem is.
So you
that-
misrepresented what
No,
that biologist
no,
just said.
no.
Because
no,
you
sir.
quoted
No, sir.
him. You
Here's what
quoted
happened.
him
Here's
as
what's
though-
happened.
what?
You said to me it's harder for some things to turn into others. I said because of environmental constraints.
Yeah.
Then you said no,
Okay,
and you
so-
gave me examples of environmental constraints.
Okay, fair enough. But,
Right?
but like that shows that.
So,
what I claimed was correct, though.
sir, at best, all you're saying is anything can become into anything else if there are sufficient environmental conditions.
Well, there are.
And the environmental conditions on a planet which is
I mean,
apparently 4 billion years old, this large, with this much speciation, is almost infinite.
What?
On a planet, on a time scale of 4 billion years of this Earth, with how long life has been on this Earth, the amount of possibilities is almost infinite.
But that doesn't change that some, even if there's a wide range of possibilities, the possibilities aren't infinite. Because, for example, there's no place on this Earth where, the ambient temperature
Sir,
is 1,000
forget
degrees
infinite,
or
let's call it
something like that.
Googleplex. Googleplex.
No, but even then, like kind of, like there's a certain kind of range of like temperatures. There's a certain range of molecular environments in the atmosphere.
Okay, sir.
So
Sir.
like we can parameterize it,
Sir,
and it's not infinite. So it's not like kind of, it's not as
Sir.
if like kind of you could evolve
Sir,
to be
we
like
have a
an
massive-
organism that's that you might find on Mars.
Sir.
There's no Mars-like environment on the planet Earth, really.
Sir, but that wasn't my point. My point was you have large plasticity going on. Now, when you look at, for example, flies need to know where humid areas are. Now, flies could have been designed to have humidity detectors. there's humidity there, let me go fly. Instead, natural selection has created an indirect solution in which they have a light detector. So they go to areas which are dark, and areas which are dark are more likely to be damp. So yes, I agree, natural selection has environmental constraints, but we already know that. One thing we do also know is that natural selection says that a human being-like creature can come from a non-human being-like creature with traits which are nothing like its. Therefore, it's also possible the other way around.
But it's much less likely.
Sir,
But like, do you agree that
Sir,
kind of
Sir,
the evolutionary pathway of like the first cell to a dinosaur is much more likely than the proposed evolutionary pathway of a dinosaur becoming back to like the first cell?
Sir,
do you agree with that?
Sir,
and if you aren't willing to answer that, would you agree
sure,
that
no, let me answer the first one
would agree with that?
first. Let me answer the first one first. What I try and do, to the best of my ability, is not give my opinion. I try and give the opinion of leading evolutionary biologists. Now, the answer to this question, according to Stephen Jay Gould, not me, is yes.
No,
Yeah, it is.
I'm certain you're misrepresenting.
Okay, sure.
Jay Gould there.
Now,
that's
okay,
absurd.
sure. So look up this example because we're filming everything, and I come to the park regularly.
Can you give a quote for that? I want to fact check that right
So let me
now.
give you the quote. He says, back in his days, we had VHS. He says, if you rewind the tape of life and you rerun it, you'll have different outcomes.
That's not the same thing, is it?
Why is it not?
Because the fact that like...
Wait, hang on a second. Do you first agree he's just pointed out something which is different to what you were saying?
No.
How?
Because like what he's pointing out is that by chance, like for example, evolutionary, like for example,
Sir, did you know he said that before I told you?
What?
Did you know he said that before I told you?
You brought this example up with me before. Yeah, I am
right.
aware of that.
So you know that's the mainstream view.
Yeah, and there's not, and that,
so you know the mainstream. You know the
mainstream
view.
That's obviously true because you know about
Sir. Let's break it down into philosophical terms because you're a philosophical guy. Are we necessary beings biologically? No. Fantastic. So we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It could have been otherwise.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing as saying that it is equally probable and equally easy evolutionary for the first cell to become a dinosaur for a dinosaur to then become the first cell again. That's not the same thing.
Let's have a conceptual picture game. This is the history of life from my left hand to my right hand, starting off with prokaryotes all the way to me and you in that hat. Right, we have this. Now here's another one which is different. Between these two, why is this one more likely than any other possibility?
You know that certain versions or tapes, certain potential tapes are more likely than others because, for example, you couldn't have the first life forms being very complicated, could you?
Can you just lift up your head? Lift up your hat.
It's pretty hard, but okay.
Lift up your hat.
No,
just lift up. I just want to see something.
He's a footballer.
I just want to see something.
Yeah, that's good.
Your brain is about the normal size as every other biologist. They have not worked out the evolutionary history of the last couple of thousand years, let alone the last 4 billion years. Yet you in this park alone with the same size brain as everyone else, you're making a claim. You're making a claim.
No biologists would
yes, they
disagree
do.
with me. Oh my
You're
goodness.
making a claim that this possibility is more likely than any other, which goes to show.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
So what did you say?
No. I said that some windings of some plays of the tape of life, or some if there's a space of all the possible kind of like plays of life. Some of them we could imagine them, and we could like have and we could say that those are less likely than others. So, for example, let's take a play of life where the first cell, where the first organism was multicellular. Okay, that's clearly very unlikely because how can you get a multicellular kind of first life form without having first a single cellular life form? So that's an example of a potential play of the tape of life, which you'd say is much less likely than the one that we had.
That wasn't the point I was making, though.
No, you said all potential plays of the
potential.
Yes.
So you can't give me an example that's incoherent.
It's not
To
totally
start
incoherent.
off with multicellular, naturalistically, before you have cellular, is incoherent.
No,
I asked,
it's
sir,
unlikely. It's unlikely. It's not impossible.
Sir, what you've done here is this.
I could give you a less extreme example that would fit.
Sir, I gave you coherent possibilities, possibility A, possibility B. You dampened my example by giving me an incoherent possibility.
You said all playings of the tape of life. You didn't specify all coherent playings of the tape of life.
When I say potential, what else does it mean?
Potential means anything that's possible.
But you're giving me...
Potential means anything that's possible.
But
yes?
sir,
Is that reasonable?
Sir, if I'm going to ask you about married bachelors, we're not going to have a
No,
fantastic
but that's not
conversation.
the same thing, a married
It is.
bachelor.
It's incoherent.
No, it's not.
It's incoherent.
It's not impossible.
According to you, it's incoherent.
No, it's not.
Hang on a second.
It's something that could happen, even though it's extremely unlikely. Like you could get a bunch of ribozymes, and they could mutate. They could mutate together to form an RNA-based life form, which had kind of communication genes.
Is it asexual or is it sexual?
It would have to be an asexual. But,
Sir,
it's obviously like
sir,
it's obviously extremely unlikely that the first cell, the first organism could be multicellular. But it's not totally impossible. And if you aren't happy, I could choose another example.
No problem.
Like I could.
But I'm going to use your logic now. Asexual or sexual? Which one is more better from a Darwinian point of view?
It depends on the situation.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You have a cell, it's asexual, it decides to have children, decides to get children.
Yeah.
Me, as an Asian Pakistani man, I want to get married. So what do? I contact somebody. They say no. You need to have a house which is this big. You need to earn this much money. I need to go somewhere, bribe a father-in-law. Sexual evolution is way more complex and less.
It's for you want everyone to believe rational human beings should have much more faith and much more belief and certainty in the proposition and the model that humans and chimps do have a shared recent common ancestry. Then they should have certainty and faith and degree of belief in the idea that
all I want to do is this.
Came about in the Garden of Eden.
All I want to do is this. I want to point out the difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding and let people decide for themselves.
Okay, well,
that's it.
No, it sounds like you've given up ground because I've seen you like debate biologists like in universities before, and with them you're kind of very modest and you kind of give like the least objectionable version of your account.
Which is what? Which is when?
So when you were talking, I can't remember what the name, but some biologist in maybe
Jeremy
the University
Pritchard.
of Sussex.
Recently.
It was like earlier this year. It was in a university. You spent nearly the first 45 minutes of the talk talking about how scientists have no evidence that there certainly is no God, and you also said that science doesn't lead to absolute certainty about how the universe
functions. And did he disagree with anything I said?
He did not. However, you didn't push forward the views which you currently frequently do in Speaker's Corner, where you try and cast doubt on the idea that humans and chimps have a common ancestor. So when you're faced with a more well-equipped kind of a speaker with more biological knowledge, you kind of retreat into your kind of modest zone.
Okay,
and then when you're in
true.
front of the general public who kind of haven't studied this in great depth, then you start trying to convince them that. Then you start trying to present misinformation where you misrepresent biologists' opinions, and you say, oh, there are all these people that say Darwinism is false.
Sir, did you see my entire presentation?
I believe so, yes. And I saw how at the very end you kind of said something like, and there's no reason to believe that there isn't an Abrahamic God.
Hang on, sir.
At the very end, you suddenly threw in that
sir.
Okay,
Sir, you had your chance to talk, so let me talk. So you saw my entire presentation.
Yeah.
In this park, I have said repeatedly 3 things. Darwinian evolution is based on a probabilistic framework. Have I not said that before?
Yeah, you said that.
Darwinian evolution is based upon multiple assumptions. And I've also said that this...
assumption is something
hang on, sir. You had your chance to talk, we're talking about that video. And I said there are disputes about its most fundamental ideas.
So I didn't quite hear that.
It's disputes about its most fundamental ideas.
It has disputes about its most fundamental.
PAD. In that very presentation, and go back and watch it tonight, that's exactly what I said at the end of my presentation. And in fact, in the Q&A, I brought it up again because somebody asked about human chimp ancestry. So, what's interesting is this. What's interesting?
You told him to adopt double
Sir, firstly, that shows your claim that what I'm saying in the park is different to what I'm saying to an academic in public is wrong. Because in front of him, I mentioned those things. Now,
You said it at the very end of the discussion when you didn't have
no,
time
I
to
didn't.
reply.
Sir,
If you had said at the beginning to him,
look,
like that, you know,
one,
there's no good
two,
reason not to
three,
believe in the
4,
Abrahamic God.
5, 6, 7. 7 cameras. No one's going to delete this footage. Go watch my debate, and you got all this evidence. I will be a liar if I didn't mention that.
Why didn't you say at the beginning that science gives no reason not to believe in an Abrahamic God? You said that at the very end. Why didn't you say that at the beginning when you had the biologist in front of you?
Logically, I started from deism to theism to Abrahamic theism.
Okay, but like,
So
you,
do you?
you knew
So
he wouldn't
so
disagree
sir,
with, like,
sir, what's happened now?
You knew he wouldn't disagree with the first 50 minutes.
Sir, what's happened now is this. You made a claim, which I didn't mention. I didn't mention some things. Now I gave you evidence. I mentioned it.
No, at the
You've
beginning-
changed your position. No, sir. You've changed your
I
position.
clarified very
You've
early
now
on that you only
said,
said it
why
at the
didn't
end."
you say it at the beginning rather than the end?
No, I also said
So
that
you've changed
earlier.
your position now.
No, I said it when I first kind of brought up this university talk.
Did you
I
actually watch it?
I said kind of, apart from at the very end, you kind of suddenly threw that in.
Sir,
you maybe didn't hear me because you were talking over at the same time.
sir,
But
sir,
yeah, I am aware of that.
Sir, you made a claim. I didn't mention probabilistic framework, assumptions, and disputes in the debate. I mentioned it in my opening presentation and later on.
No, you spent
And-
nearly all of the debate just talking
And
about
sir, what did you
the
say?
obvious things.
What did you say earlier? He didn't disagree.
What?
He didn't
He
disagree.
didn't disagree with like the fact that kind of science doesn't lead to absolute certainty about
Yes,
the
yes.
universe.
So let's agree
And
with-
he didn't disagree that
So-
scientists have no. He didn't disagree that there's nothing in science there's no reason why scientists wouldn't believe in there being a god or something along those lines. Like, kind of
Okay, sir.
a god can.
So
you know,
you didn't
can
watch it.
No,
So
I did watch it.
So,
But
so
it was
let
a
me.
while ago.
So let me just tell you what I said in the debate, and you got all these cameras. Number one, I said science doesn't undermine the existence of God.
Yes. Yes.
I said
Yes.
science doesn't lead to certainty,
Yes.
and I mentioned science doesn't undermine deism, theism, or Abrahamic theism.
And how long do you have to
sir,
do
sir,
Yes,
sir,
yes.
sir, one second, man.
Yes, yes.
Sir, I also mentioned
I can support you
science
from physics.
does not undermine the
Yes.
Abrahamic theism because even human
Yes, I
chimpanzee
can support you
ancestry
from physics and
is
from
based on a
mathematics.
probabilistic framework
From
which has
mechanics.
assumptions, which has disputes.
You are right.
And in the presentation, I spent time bringing out a quote from Elliot Sober, an atheist philosopher of science, who says humans and chimps must share a common ancestor because they're so similar, and humans and mushrooms must have separate ancestry because they're so different. This is both naive. I said that all in the opening.
No,
So you did not watch the beginning of the debate.
It seems. No, I remember kind of quite clearly that the only time you spent any time talking about Abrahamic.
So did I mention? Did I mention?
You spoke about it in the question and answer section when like
Did I
someone
men-
asked you
did
about
I mention
what
about-
human and chimpanzee
did I
common
chat-
ancestry.
did I-
And what you said to
Sir,
that
sir,
person
one
was
second.
basically kind of okay, accept it as a working model, but also
Sir,
don't believe in it
that
being
means
true.
that means you didn't watch the debate.
No, I
because
did. You were telling him to adopt double think.
Sir, no, I wasn't.
You're telling
No, I
him to
wasn't.
adopt
No, I
two
wasn't.
mutually
So,
contradictory beliefs.
sir, now two things are going to get exposed. The very fact you gave me that example shows you didn't watch the opening because the points which I just mentioned now, I mentioned in the beginning. Now, what I said to the gentleman later on is something different, but that's also something which correlates with the beginning, which is about Darwinian evolution being based on a probabilistic framework with assumptions, with disputes. All I
Okay,
was saying
but
to him is
surely-
this.
but that's
No,
evidence
but
that
sir,
a rational
no,
being
but
would
sir,
have
sir,
to not
there's-
believe in it.
Sir, there's two things here. Number one, I said science is based on a probabilistic framework with assumptions, with disputes in the beginning, and the professor didn't disagree.
No, but that's. I'm talking about the Abrahamic God bit, though.
Sir, that was in the opening.
No,
Look,
you
sir.
saved that until the very end.
The question that I spoke to the gentleman, which is about epistemic weighing, let's do that as your second question. Let's deal with the first question first. You're saying I didn't mention probabilistic framework with assumptions, with disputes. I did mention that. But here's the thing. Find me one single evolutionary biologist in the world who will disagree that Darwinian evolution is based on a probabilistic framework, that it has multiple assumptions, and there are disputes amongst biologists about its most fundamental ideas. If you manage to find me one, bring them here, or we can set up a discussion. Why? Why?
All of them
Because
would dispute the use of your word assumption. All of them would dispute
no,
that.
they would not.
Yes, they would.
No,
because
they would
assumption
not.
has connotations that you just leapt to it
No,
without
sir.
reason and evidence.
Sir.
Whereas many of the
Sir.
so-called assumptions
Sir.
of kind of
Oh, so there are
evolutionary
assumptions.
biology No, I'm saying so-called, what you call assumptions, many of them are actually
Okay,
based
so
on
wait, sir.
observation and
Hold this
evidence
second.
and inference.
If an evolutionary biologist uses the word, and he's an atheist, and he's a renowned academic, and he uses the word assumptions, if I give you that quote, will you admit you're wrong?
Well, it depends on the context that he said it.
What if he says that?
If he said, all of like evolutionary biology is just based on assumptions.
No.
Like, well, that would be his
No,
fault.
no.
He would be out of the
Sir, don't
mainstream
try and
for
get
that.
out of it. I asked you a question. If he says that the assumptions of neo-Darwinism have been falsified,
let's look at the exact context, and I'm
He's
sure
gonna
it'll
show
be
you
just another example.
would you
of
admit
making
you're
a
wrong?
mountain out of a
Would you
molehill.
admit you're wrong?
He's gonna show you now.
No, because like what you're because like.
So you wouldn't admit you're wrong when you're wrong?
No, because you're placing two different situations.
No, biologist.
I'm objecting to your use of the word assumptions of the so-called assumptions of evolutionary biology, because the word assumption has the connotation that it is not based on evidence and sensible logical reasoning. So an assumption is not like, if you assume something, it's when you just think that it's true. Like the opposite of an assumption would be kind of when you believe in something based on firm evidence. You don't need to assume anything if there's firm evidence
Okay.
for something.
So-
And so things like, for example,
Sir.
the fact that like one of the examples, homology, which you give it, you call that an assumption. In fact, it's based on logical reasoning and evidence, because like we observe, the evidence is that we observe that our genetic sequence, kind of all other things
Sir,
being equal,
sir, what you're doing now-
mutates at a
what you're doing
particular
now-
rate.
what you're doing
and
now-
so you call that an
Sir.
assumption, but it's actually kind of based on
Sir,
sound reasoning and
what
evidence.
you're doing is this. You're confusing assumptions and conclusions. Let me just
No,
make a statement.
You said homology is an
Let's stick to
assumption,
this.
But it's based on evidence and reasoning. So
The same
don't call it
website-
an assumption.
Go to thethirdwayofevolution.com, Dennis Noble, an Oxford evolutionary professor. All the central assumptions of neo-Darwinism have been disproven.
But we need to look at what he means by that. In the
Gradualism,
context.
for one. So let's start by one. Gradualism is not a conclusion, it's an assumption. And according to him, it's been disproven.
But it depends on in what exact context.
Firstly, sir, let's agree about something, right? There are assumptions in evolutionary biology.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Some of them, but not all of them are kind of just blind assumptions.
Fantastic. Have some assumptions been challenged by other atheist evolutionary biologists?
Yeah, probably. But
That's
like,
what I'm saying.
No, but like again, you're like kind of now it sounds like you're leaping between Darwinism's ideas 150 years ago and just like kind of the biological
Okay,
mainstream
sir.
today.
Sir.
Because obviously,
Okay,
like,
sir.
obviously,
Sir,
Darwin
sir,
had like a bunch
sir,
of
look. Sir, the
um,
reason why you're making these simple mistakes is because you don't understand the difference between these two things.
No, it's you. Who
So
can
let
be
me
between
just
them.
ask you a question. Did Darwin know about genetics?
No,
No, he didn't. So the selfish gene idea, where did that come from?
but a 20th century biologist.
Yes, like who?
One of them would be Richard
WD.
Dawkins.
No, that's bull.
Well,
No, sir.
What do you mean by
sir,
come from?
Sir, this is the thing. This is the reason why I like pointing out that atheists don't know what they're talking about. Number one, Richard Dawkins is not an evolutionary biologist. He's a journalist, a famous professor. Two, he never came up with the selfish gene.
Okay, yeah, fine.
But why do people like you think he did?
Because he popularized it.
Because he popularized it and there's propaganda and you guys actually don't understand the theory itself.
No, like it's the central ideas.
Let me tell you something, right? The selfish gene idea, the idea of a gene-centered view. This came about when Richard Dawkins was still in his nappies.
Yeah.
So why do you think that he came up with it?
No,
Because you guys, look, I'm going to be honest.
I don't think there's
I'm
one
going to be honest.
inventor of the idea.
Richard Dawkins is a prophet for you guys. You try and
No,
relate
no,
him to everything.
No.
So let me just clarify some things. If you want to attribute the selfish gene in terms of its modern, most sophisticated form, W.D. Hamilton. Richard Dawkins just got popular off it. That's it. Okay. Now, whenever it's mentioned the gene-centered view, automatically we should think of the modern synthesis. Because Darwin had no clue about genetics, although Mendel sent him his paper. From what we know, he didn't read it. So, when we're speaking about the gene-centered view, we're speaking about the modern synthesis. Now, the problem with atheists like yourself is you try and come and challenge this content, but you don't even know the history, and you don't even know the background, and you don't even know any of these things. And you don't know. No, I'm being.
Biology. You don't need to necessarily know history if you actually know biology.
So,
And
okay.
if you know biology, you don't need to know the history.
Okay, so let me just ask you this. Let me just ask you this, sir. 1 second. Let me ask you this. You're saying that you actually know what you're talking about when it comes to evolutionary biology.
Certain things, yes.
Sure. Do you know about natural selection?
Yeah, to some
Okay,
degree.
so who came up with the theory of natural selection?
That's not relevant to what natural selection is.
Answer, man.
No, it's absolutely relevant
No,
because
no,
I'm going to give you an
are you
example.
able to know what natural selection is without knowing who invented it?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
but
so what are
you
you
claim
asking?
you claim to know about evolutionary biology, and you love bringing in random scientific facts which are irrelevant to show your knowledge.
No, they
So
aren't irrelevant.
So
Like,
let's
for
begin off
example,
with this.
You never answered
Do
why.
you-
You
do
never
you-
answered why kind of why this person who was standing here. You never answered him when he asked you why do you consider a paternity test
I did.
to be evidence of
Because you're
recent shared
cir-
ancestry,
because you're-
but you don't consider
because you're
kind of
circular
shared-
reasoning.
What's the
And
circular
then-
reasoning?
Okay, so here's the
let's hear
circular
it.
reasoning, and we're going to go back to this point because this is another side issue you brought up.
It's not a side issue. It
We
shows
know
that you are being
human beings
relevant
beget
or
other
rational.
human beings. We know human beings beget other human beings. So when you're doing a paternity test, you're not assuming homology. Homology is an assumption that you make in nature,
No,
and you try and go as far as you can before you come across homoplasy. Now, to begin off with this idea
your
that
reasoning's
no,
incorrect.
to equate the human chimpanzees to a paternity test is a falsification. Now,
No, it isn't.
now
because
here's the
you-
point.
you
Here's the
don't
point, sir.
understand why
Here's the
people
point.
believe
Here's
in
the point.
paternity
You
tests.
agreed with me
You're
earlier. No, sir.
misrepresenting
We're
things.
gonna. We went off on your tangent. Now we're gonna go back to
No,
what
no,
we're
no,
talking
no,
about.
because you haven't answered it. You've just like
sir,
led people to believe
sir,
something wrong.
Sir,
No,
sir, listen.
you're saying
listen.
that
Already,
tests
sir,
work
listen.
for a reason
We
that they
can
don't
go back
work.
to that in a second. Let's deal with this issue that you're trying to sidetrack. Natural selection. Who came up with it? Charles
Well,
Darwin.
now you're just
Darwin.
questioning me on the
One
history,
second.
which isn't
One
relevant to
second. One
science.
second. It is.
Why? No,
Sir,
why are
it
you
is.
digressing?
Let me explain why. Because you clearly don't know about this theory, and you keep trying
No,
to
I
show that you do.
No, because
So-
you're misrepresenting it to the public. You're spreading so much.
How the hell am I
nonsense.
misrepresenting it to the
Because-
public
no,
when
because
you didn't know the
well,
difference
for
between the
one-
modern
okay.
synthesis and who came up with selfish gene? So let's stick to
No,
this.
because that's history. That's not the actual content.
Natural selection
That's not the content
as
of
a
the theory.
theory.
You've misrepresented the content of the theory.
Charles Darwin came up with it.
You
Charles
made
Darwin
the
came up with
claim
it.
that,
So
kind
did
of,
Alfred
you made the
Russell
claim that a
Wallace.
dinosaur could
Now,
just as easily evolve into the first cell.
I'm
as
going
the
to
first cell could evolve
prove.
into a dinosaur.
I'm going to
and that's
prove
definitely
something,
wrong.
sir. I'm going to prove something. What I'm going to prove is this: using just the people here, I'm going to show natural selection is false.
Okay, great. What do you mean by natural selection being false, by the way?
Let me explain. What I mean by that is that natural selection is what creates biological novelty.
Isn't it one
Sir,
of the things that creates biological novelty?
Ooh, see what we're doing here? Before I've even got to the argument, you're trying to run off to something else.
No, I'm trying.
We're talking about natural
I'm
selection.
trying to make you kind of define very clearly the objection that you're about to bring, so you don't like hopscotch. Okay, so
Sure.
are you saying that natural selection leads to no biological novelty at all?
Sure. What's your name?
Abdullah.
Abdullah. Right. Do you believe he's subhuman?
No.
You don't believe he's subhuman. What would you think about a theory that's predicated on other subhuman species being subhuman, being inferior?
Well,
You say it's false.
No, I'd say it's morally incorrect and like.
You'd say it's false.
Can I ask one question?
You'd say it's
I want to ask
false.
one question, yeah.
Right.
Sure. But
If you
like,
take
no,
off your shoes.
No, even if
Wait, hang
Darwin
on.
believed this.
Okay,
I don't
hang
believe in
on a second.
exactly what
Hang on
Darwin
a second.
believes.
Hang on a second.
This is so irrelevant.
Whoa,
This is just
wait,
showboating.
no, it's not,
It
sir.
is,
I
it
can
is,
see you're
because-
very uncomfortable,
no,
and I'm
because
enjoying
because
this.
You are. You're showboating.
Sir.
This isn't what like.
Sir,
mainstream
let me
biologists
ask you
believe.
something.
There aren't any mainstream biologists who say that kind of
Okay.
people like this gentleman are inferior.
Okay, sir, 1 second.
There aren't
I'm
any
going to give you
biologists who
evidence.
say that
So
there
what
are
you
I'm going to
saying?
give you evidence. Okay, sir, where you from? Where you
This
from?
isn't the biological mainstream.
You're from Jamaica.
This isn't
Okay,
total
1
red
second, 1
herring.
second. You're from Jamaica,
Oh,
Abdullah. Okay, 1
why
second.
you're debasing yourself.
No.
by
Tell
doing
me
this.
this. Tell me this.
Degrading
No,
yourself.
don't
You're
say that.
making
One
yourself-
second,
You're making
one
yourself
second,
look
one
like a clown when you do
Now,
Oh, let us speak, man.
this. This isn't biology.
If somebody,
Jen,
sir, let
come
me
on,
ask you a
why are you
question. If somebody believes that black people have feet like these, they have an opposable thumb, which is why they're good at climbing trees. What would you say about such an individual?
Racist.
You'd say he's racist. You'd say he's a fool, and you'd say he sees evidence when it's not there. That's what Charles Darwin wrote in The Descent of Man.
Okay, so why is that relevant to biological consensus?
Oh, why is
today?
it relevant?
Yeah, because
He didn't
because-
deny it's there.
Yeah, because modern biologists don't believe this.
Let me.
Yeah, I'm not defending that. I'm not defending that.
Hold on. Wait.
This is Tazel Showberry thing.
I love it.
Do you want
No,
to
stop.
no,
Fire start.
That's
Fire
one
start.
thing.
Fire start.
I say one thing, please. Let me say one thing. No. Okay,
All right.
Humans went away from
No, the fact that you're
So
running away
cultural
from this means
evolution.
that you don't want to talk about
Can I say
actual
one thing?
biological
Sure.
facts.
involved in eugenics.
I'm not saying one
This
thing.
is a circus.
That's the way it's
You
relevant.
are talking about
يا ديمة خير وعطاء ويمام نقاء وسخاء يا نجما شع فأبهجنا يا شعلة نور وضاء يا ديمة خير وعطاء ويمام نقاء